The line for the rideshare app wasn't moving, and Jordan wouldn't stop yelling about it. Man, it says 4 minutes. It said 4 minutes for like 10 minutes. He had his phone 3 inches from his face, one arm still draped in the plastic chainmail from his night costume, half of it sagging off his shoulder like it had given up on the night, same as the rest of us. I wasn't really listening. I'd had 4 drinks over 5 hours, which put me somewhere between fine and should probably not be doing math. And I was mostly just tired, standing on the curb outside the bar where the party had spilled out onto 5th Avenue an hour ago. The Gaslamp quarter at 1 in the morning on Halloween weekend is its own kind of chaos. A werewolf arguing with a bouncer, 3 different jokers within a 2-block radius, somebody's inflatable dinosaur costume deflating slowly against a parking meter like it was dying. Mia was next to me, scrolling through her own phone, trying to find us a car that wasn't 12 minutes out, and $40 surged. Casey had wandered off to throw up in a planter, which, fair. That's when I saw it. Down the block, past the crosswalk, there's a side street. More of an alley, really, wedged between a shuttered taco shop and a parking garage. Not well lit. There was something standing right at the mouth of it, just far enough back that the streetlight didn't quite reach. At first, my brain did what everyone's brain does at 1 a.m. on Halloween weekend.
What is that?
Filed it under costume. Big guy, maybe. Fursuit. Somebody's elaborate werewolf getup. Dark red down the front of it like fake blood. Standing there waiting for a friend, or a ride, or whatever. Except it wasn't moving the way a person in a costume moves. It wasn't shifting its weight, wasn't fidgeting, wasn't doing any of the small, restless things drunk people do while they wait. It was just standing there, still, facing the street. Yo, I tapped Jordan's arm. Look at that guy. Jordan followed my finger, squinted, and laughed. The furry? Yeah, saw him earlier by the taco place. Dude's committed. Mia glanced up for maybe a second and a half. Costume contest was at the club on 6th. He probably won something. She went back to her phone. That should have been it. That's usually how it works. You point something out, somebody gives you a reasonable explanation, you move on. And I wanted to move on. I really did. But I kept looking, and the longer I looked, the more the explanation didn't sit right. For one thing, nobody else on the street was paying it any attention, which made sense. It was 50, 60 feet back from the crosswalk, half in shadow, easy to miss if you weren't already staring. But I was staring, and the shape of it was wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. The shoulders were too wide, not costume padding wide. Wide in a way that made the rest of it look narrow by comparison, like someone had built a person around a barrel. And it wasn't watching the club or the bar or any specific group of people. It was watching the flow of the street, the crosswalk, the cars, the general current of bodies moving from one place to another. Like it had caught on the movement without understanding any of it. Dude, it's fine, Jordan said, not even looking anymore. Everybody and their mom did a werewolf this year. I saw at least 6. 6 that were standing completely still in an alley for 10 minutes. Bro, you're spiraling. Drink some water. I didn't say anything else. I watched the app count down, 3 minutes now, and I watched the shape at the mouth of the alley, and for a second, just a second, it turned its head toward us. Not fast, not dramatic. The kind of slow turn you do when something catches your attention, and you want to get a better look at it without seeming obvious. Then Casey came stumbling back from the planter, wiping her mouth, saying something about needing water and maybe pizza, and everyone's attention scattered the way attention does in a group of 5 drunk people on a sidewalk. And when I looked back down the block, the shape had shifted position. Not left the alley, just moved, deeper into the shadow, maybe 6 feet back from where it had been, in a way that made it harder to make out anything except a rough outline and, for 1/2 second under the wrong angle of light, something that looked less like fur and more like matted wet hair clumped in patches over dark, uneven skin. Car's here, Mia said. I got in the back seat, because that's what you do, and I looked out the rear window the whole time we pulled away, trying to find the alley again in the tangle of streetlights and neon behind us. I couldn't tell if the shape was still there or if it had never really been the shape I thought it was. Everyone in that car was drunk enough to believe absolutely anything about a Halloween weekend downtown, including nothing at all. I was the only one who wasn't drunk enough to stop wondering. The car merged onto 4th Avenue, and I kept twisting around in my seat, trying to catch one more look at that alley before the buildings swallowed it whole. Mia asked if I was good without really looking up from her phone, and I said, yeah, just tired, because there wasn't a version of, I think that thing looked back at us, that wouldn't get laughed out of the car. Jordan had already moved on to arguing with Casey about whether Taco Bell was still open, and Casey had her forehead pressed to the window, eyes half shut, mumbling something about pizza rolls. Nobody else in that car had seen what I'd seen, or if they had, it hadn't registered as anything worth holding on to. That's the thing about being the only soberish person in a group. You end up carrying the night by yourself, whether you want to or not. By the time we hit the on-ramp for the 5, the alley was just another dark gap behind us, swallowed up in a city full of dark gaps. I pulled up my phone and typed Gaslamp Halloween Costume Contest into the search bar, then deleted it before I hit enter, because what was I even trying to prove, and to who? Mia caught me staring at the blank search box and asked if I was really not going to let this go. I told her it was nothing. Forget it. She shrugged and turned back to the window. I didn't forget it. I just stopped saying it out loud, which at the time felt like the same thing, and which I'd later understand was the first mistake of a lot of mistakes that night. I didn't think about the alley again until Tuesday. And even then, it wasn't really about the alley, it was about parking. My client meeting was downtown, this coffee shop on 6th that a startup founder had picked because he liked the energy of it, which is startup founder for, I don't have an office. I circled for 15 minutes before I found a spot 2 blocks over, close enough to the Gaslamp that I recognized the intersection without meaning to. Daylight changes everything down there. The bars that had been spilling neon and noise on Saturday were just storefronts now, gated and quiet. A guy hosing down the sidewalk in front of one of them like he was trying to erase the whole weekend. I walked past the mouth of that side street on my way to the coffee shop. I wasn't planning to. My feet just took the route they took, and there it was, the same alley. Except now it was 9 in the morning and full of ordinary daylight, and there was nothing in it except a dumpster, a stack of flattened cardboard, and a parking attendant's little booth with the shutter down. I stood there for a second like an idiot, staring into an empty alley in broad daylight, half expecting it to mean something. It didn't. It was just a gap between 2 buildings that smelled like old grease from the taco place and city trash day. I felt stupid enough that I almost turned around and left it alone completely. Would have been easier. But there was something at the far end of the alley past the dumpster, where it opened up into a service lot behind the parking garage. A strip of yellow tape, the kind you see around a pothole or a downed wire, wrapped loosely around a drainage grate. Not police tape, not caution tape from the city. Just generic yellow hazard tape, the roll-your-own kind, tied in an amateur knot to a bent piece of rebar sticking out of the grate. I don't know why I walked back there. Client meeting in 20 minutes, coffee I hadn't had yet, and I'm wandering into a service lot behind a parking garage because of some tape. But I did. And when I got close enough, I saw the grate itself was cracked. Not rusted through, actually cracked. Like something heavy had come down on it hard enough to split the iron. There was a dark stain radiating out from it across the concrete, the kind of stain that could have been oil, could have been anything, except it had a rusty, brownish cast at the edges that oil doesn't really get. A guy in a city maintenance vest came around the corner of the garage right then, pushing a cart with orange cones on it, and gave me a look that said clearly, this was not a place tourists usually wandered into. "Help you?" he said. Not rude, just tired. "Sorry, was there an accident here or something?" I nodded at the grate. He glanced at it like he'd already answered this question for somebody else that morning. "Sinkhole thing. Old pipe under there gave out Saturday night, cracked the grate. City's coming out Thursday to fix it proper." He shrugged. Weird night for it. We had like 3 separate calls back here. Noise complaints. Somebody said they heard something in the walls of the garage. Probably raccoons got into the drain when it opened up. "Raccoons," I repeated. City's got a raccoon problem you wouldn't believe. He said it like he'd delivered this line before, and pushed his cart on past me toward the garage entrance, and that was that. I went to my meeting. I sat across from a guy in a hoodie who wanted a logo that felt organic but also, like, aggressive. And I nodded and took notes, and didn't think about drainage grates or raccoons or anything else. Because that's the thing about daylight. It's very good at making the previous night feel like it happened to somebody else. It wasn't until I was driving home, stuck at the light on Broadway, that it caught up with me. Not the tape, not the crack in the grate, the stain. I kept picturing the shape and size of it, spreading out from the busted metal in a rough, uneven fan, and comparing it, I couldn't help it, to the shape of the thing I'd seen standing in that same alley 2 nights before, the wide shoulders, the dark front of it that I'd assumed in the moment was some kind of costume paint. I told myself it was nothing. Sinkhole, old pipe, city infrastructure literally falling apart in real time, which happens constantly in a city built on top of itself for 150 years. I told myself raccoons make noise in walls all the time, that a noise complaint on a Saturday night in the Gaslamp is about as noteworthy as a parking ticket. But that night, lying in bed with my phone lighting up my face at 1 a.m, I did the thing I'd stopped myself from doing in the car 3 days earlier. I searched it. Not the costume contest. I typed San Diego Gaslamp Saturday night noise complaint animal into the search bar and got nothing useful. A couple old news stories about coyotes near Balboa Park. A Reddit thread about somebody's dog getting loose downtown 2 years ago. Nothing recent, nothing that matched. I tried a different search. Gaslamp Sinkhole October. That got me one local news brief, 4 sentences long, about a water main issue near 5th and Island that crews were repairing. No mention of noise. No mention of anything except a scheduled maintenance window and an apology for the inconvenience to nearby businesses. Nothing lined up into a story. That was almost worse than if it had. A stain that could be oil. A grate that could have cracked from age. A noise complaint that could have been raccoons, could have been nothing. Could have been somebody's car alarm going off for the 40th time that week. Every single piece of it had a boring, reasonable explanation sitting right next to it. And none of those explanations quite fit together into the same shape. I put the phone down around 2, and I lay there in the dark listening to my own building settle. The pipes ticking, a car passing outside, and I thought about the way that thing on Saturday had turned its head toward us, slow and unbothered, like it had already decided we weren't worth the trouble of moving. I didn't sleep much after that. By Thursday, I'd made a document, not like a serious one. I told myself it was just notes, the kind of thing you jot down when a client gives you scattered ideas, and you need to organize them before a follow-up call. Except instead of logo concepts, it was a timeline. Saturday, 1:04 a.m. Approximate time I first noticed the figure, cross-referenced against a photo Mia had posted that night with a timestamp. Saturday, sometime before 1 a.m. Noise complaints near the parking garage, according to a guy in a maintenance vest who may or may not have been fully paying attention to what he was telling me. Sunday, no reports of anything. Monday, nothing. Tuesday, the grate, the tape, the stain that could have been oil. It didn't add up to a case, it added up to a guy with too much free time and a mild hangover from 3 days ago that had somehow curdled into something else. I went back to the maintenance guy's line about raccoons, because it kept nagging at me, the specific way he'd said it. Not like a guess, like a script. City's got a raccoon problem you wouldn't believe. That's not how people talk about something they're not used to explaining. That's how people talk about something they've been told to say. So, I did the annoying millennial thing and I called the city. Not like 911. I found a general public works line for the Gaslamp District Maintenance Division. Sat on hold for 11 minutes listening to a loop of hold music that sounded like it had been recorded specifically to make people hang up, and finally got a woman who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. I had a question about a water main repair near 5th and Island, I said. Saturday night. I was wondering if there were any other calls associated with that, like noise complaints or anything unusual reported in the area. There was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough that I noticed it. That'd be a public records request, she said. You'd need to submit through the portal. Sure, I can do that. I was just curious if you happen to know off the top of your head. I don't have access to call logs from my desk, she said, which wasn't really an answer to what I'd asked. And then, before I could push, is there anything else I can help you with today? I said no, thanked her, hung up, and sat there in my kitchen feeling like I'd just knocked on a door and heard somebody go quiet on the other side of it. I did submit the records request, mostly out of stubbornness. The portal said to expect a response in 10 to 15 business days, which felt like it defeated the entire purpose of curiosity. But I filled it out anyway. Date, location, nature of the call, the whole thing. And then I did what anyone would do next, which was go down a very specific, very late-night internet rabbit hole. San Diego doesn't really have a werewolf mythology, not the way some places do. No local legend, no roadside historical marker, nothing that showed up when I searched Gaslamp Quarter werewolf, except a walking tour company that used the word ironically in a listing for their haunted Gaslamp ghost tour, which mostly seemed to be about a dead prostitute from the 1890s and a hotel with bad plumbing. What I did find, 3 pages deep into a search that had wandered pretty far from where it started, was a decade-old thread on a hiking forum. Somebody asking about strange howling sounds near Presidio Park. Another user replying that it was probably coyotes. A third user, username long deleted, account banned, insisting it wasn't coyotes, that they'd seen something standing upright near the trailhead at dusk. Too broad in the chest moved wrong. The thread had 11 replies, most of them mocking. One guy posting a meme, and then it just stopped, the way threads do when nobody cares enough to keep arguing. Presidio Park is maybe 4 miles from the Gaslamp. Not close, exactly. Not far either if you're talking about something that can move. I sat with that for a long time, longer than I should have, the blue light of my laptop the only thing on in the apartment. It wasn't proof of anything. It was a deleted forum account from 10 years ago, and a guy in a vest with a rehearsed line about raccoons and a cracked grate that might have just been an old pipe finally giving out the way old pipes do in a city where half the infrastructure predates cars. But here's the thing about curiosity. Once it actually gets its hooks in you, it doesn't need proof to keep going. It just needs enough loose threads that pulling on one makes another one move. I texted Mia around midnight, more out of restlessness than any real plan. You still have that video from Saturday, the one from outside the bar. She didn't answer right away. She works retail, early shift, probably asleep. But the text sat there delivered and unread, and I found myself wondering what was even in that video, whether the alley was in frame at all, whether I'd catch 2 seconds of something in the background that I'd missed live, because I'd been looking at it with my own eyes, instead of a camera that doesn't blink, doesn't get distracted, doesn't decide halfway through that it's being paranoid. I didn't get an answer that night. I lay in bed running the timeline again in my head. The figure, the turn of its head, the grate, the raccoons, the forum thread, the pause on the phone that had been just a little too long. And for the first time since Saturday, the feeling underneath all of it wasn't quite fear. It was closer to the feeling you get when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, and you found 2 pieces that you're almost sure fit together, even though you haven't pushed them in yet. Mia texted back around 10 the next morning. Mid-shift, all lowercase, and clearly typed one-handed between customers. LOL, why do you need my story video? Sent it though, check Insta. Then, a minute later. You're being weird lately. BTW, I didn't argue with that. I went straight to her Instagram story archive, found Saturday night, and there it was. 22 seconds, shaky. Mostly Jordan doing an impression of the bouncer from the first bar we'd tried and gotten turned away from. Mia's laugh in the background. The rideshare app's blue dot creeping across her phone screen in one corner. Nothing useful at first pass. I watched it 3 times before I noticed that, for about a second and a half, right as she panned the phone to catch Casey stumbling off the curb, the frame swept past the mouth of that alley. I slowed it down, paused it. The image was grainy, night mode noise all over it, streetlight glare washing out half the frame. But there was a shape there, low in the corner, mostly cut off by the edge of the screen, not clear enough to be evidence of anything. Clear enough that once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. The way you can't unsee a face in a pattern of wood grain once somebody's pointed it out to you. I sent the paused frame to Mia. Is this the guy I was talking about? She didn't respond for almost 20 minutes, and when she did, it wasn't what I expected. That's so weird. I actually thought I saw something too when I was checking the video later that night. Figured it was just my phone glitching lol that stopped me cold. Mia hadn't said anything about seeing something. She'd laughed it off on the sidewalk, same as everyone else. But apparently, at some point after we all went home, alone, half asleep, scrolling back through her own footage the way people do, she'd noticed the same thing I had and just filed it away as a phone glitch, because that's a much easier thing to file something as than, there was something standing in that alley and I have proof. I called her. She picked up on the second ring, said she only had a few minutes before she had to get back on the floor. You said you thought you saw something. What did it look like to you? I don't know, Dylan. It's like a blurry night video. It could be anything. A guy in a costume, a shadow, whatever. She paused. Why are you so locked in on this? It's been almost a week. I didn't have a great answer for that. I'm not the kind of person who chases things. I'd let stranger stuff than this go before. Unexplained noises, a weird Craigslist ad, a coworker who ghosted mid-project without a word. Normally, my brain just closes the tab. This one wouldn't close. There was a cracked drainage grate behind the parking garage, I said, right around where I saw it. City guy told me it was raccoons. Then I called the city and the woman on the phone acted like I'd asked her something she wasn't supposed to answer. Mia was quiet for a second. Okay, that could just be like a bureaucracy thing. People hate answering phones. Maybe. You sound like you don't believe that. I didn't say anything because she wasn't wrong, and also because I didn't have a version of what I actually believed that sounded reasonable out loud yet. She had to go. She told me to drink some water and touch grass, which under different circumstances would have been funny, and hung up. I sat with the paused frame open on my laptop for another hour after that, zooming in as far as the resolution would let me before it dissolved into meaningless blocks of pixel noise. There wasn't a face in it. There wasn't really a shape you could call definitive. Just a mass darker than the shadow around it, positioned at roughly the height and rough proportion of something standing upright, something with shoulders too wide for the rest of it. Exactly the impression I'd had with my own eyes 3 nights before it had ever occurred to me to look for it in a video. I thought about the forum thread. Too broad in the chest, moved wrong. I thought about the maintenance guy's rehearsed little line about raccoons, delivered like something he'd said before, to somebody before me, probably more than once, which meant more than one person had probably asked him the same kind of question I had. That was the part that actually got under my skin. Not the shape in the alley, not the grate, not even Mia admitting she'd noticed something too, and just decided not to mention it. It was the idea that maybe I wasn't the first person to notice any of this, that there was a small, scattered, mostly silent group of people out there. A guy with a deleted forum account, a woman on a public works phone line trained to redirect certain kinds of questions, maybe Mia herself in some quiet corner of her own head, who'd each seen one piece of something and decided, individually, without ever comparing notes, that it wasn't worth saying out loud. I opened a new tab and searched something I hadn't tried yet. Not werewolf, not Gaslamp, just San Diego animal attack unexplained. The first 4 results were about dog bites. The 5th was a 2-year-old missing persons flyer for a guy named Aaron Whitfield, last seen leaving a bar near the convention center around 1 a.m. Never found. Case listed as inactive. I stared at that for a long time before I closed the laptop. I told myself I wasn't going to email a stranger about a missing person case at 11 at night. And then I did it anyway. The flyer had led to a local news story, 3 paragraphs, no follow-up. The kind of coverage a missing persons case gets when it happens to someone without much of a public footprint. Aaron Whitfield, 28, worked at a marine supply warehouse near the port. Last seen leaving Analog Bar near the convention center a little after 1 in the morning on a Saturday in September, 2 years back. No suspects, no arrests. A police statement that used the word investigation, the way statements like that always do, meaning nothing was actually happening anymore. There was a Facebook group, Find Aaron Whitfield, 400 and something members, most of the activity from the first few months after he disappeared, and then a long, slow trickle of nothing after that. A pinned post from someone named Renata Whitfield, who I figured out from the comments was his older sister. I read through 18 months of posts before I let myself message her, and even then I didn't know what I was going to say until I'd already typed it. I told her the truth, mostly. That I wasn't a reporter, wasn't law enforcement, wasn't anybody with any actual authority to be asking questions. That I'd seen something strange near the Gaslamp a week ago, and that when I started poking around, I'd landed on her brother's case, and that I didn't want to bother her if this was a dead end. But I had a couple questions if she didn't mind. She wrote back the next morning, which surprised me. People who've spent 2 years fielding messages from strangers about a missing family member usually don't respond to another one unless something about it catches their attention. "What did you see?" she wrote. "No offense, but people message me all the time thinking they cracked it. Usually it's nothing." I told her. The alley, the figure, the way it hadn't moved like a person waiting for a ride, the way its head had turned. I left out the grate and the raccoons and the phone call, because typing all of it out made it sound less like a lead and more like the beginning of a mental health episode. Her response took almost 2 hours. When it came, it wasn't what I expected. "Aaron used to say weird stuff about that part of downtown," she wrote. Not like scared weird. More like, he worked nights sometimes, warehouse shifts that ended late, and he'd walk through the Gaslamp to get to his car because parking was cheaper a few blocks out. He mentioned a couple times there was this smell back by the parking structures on 5th. Said it was like nothing he could place. Wet dog, but also like copper almost. I used to give him crap for it. Told him it was probably just the dumpsters. I read that twice. Wet dog and copper. Not the same words the maintenance guy had used. Not the same as the stain I'd seen on the concrete, but close enough in shape that it made something tighten in my chest. "Did the police ever look at that area specifically?" I typed back. "The parking structures. They looked at the bar, the route back to his car, standard stuff," she wrote. "Nothing ever came of it. Honestly, after like 6 months, they kind of just stopped calling me with updates. I had to keep pushing for anything." I sat with my phone for a while after that, not typing anything, just looking at the conversation. There's a particular kind of guilt that comes from realizing you might be circling something real that a family has been circling for 2 years, with a lot more at stake than curiosity, and I felt it land on me all at once, heavier than I expected. I asked her one more question before I let her go. "Is there anywhere specific he used to park? Like which structure?" She sent a pin. It was the same garage, not just the same block, the same structure, the one with the service lot behind it, the one with the grate I'd stood over on Tuesday morning, staring at a stain I'd talked myself into believing was probably just oil. I didn't sleep that night either, but it wasn't the same restless, wired feeling from before. This was heavier, slower, the kind of not sleeping that comes from sitting with something you can't quite fit into a normal shape yet. I kept thinking about a warehouse worker walking the same 4 blocks I'd walked a week ago, at roughly the same hour, past the same alley, maybe more than once, maybe dozens of times without anything happening. Until one night it did. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and made coffee I didn't need, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open to nothing in particular, just the cursor blinking in an empty document. And I thought about the fact that nobody had connected any of this. Not the city worker with his rehearsed raccoon line, not the woman on the public records phone line, not the police who'd looked at the route back to his car and found nothing worth mentioning, not even Renata, who'd been circling the edges of it for 2 years without the one piece I happened to have. An actual sighting, close enough and recent enough to mean something. It wasn't proof. I kept telling myself that, the same way I'd been telling myself all week. A missing person, a stain that could be oil, a smell some guy mentioned once to his sister 3 years ago, a shape in a grainy night mode video that could be anything at all if you squinted the right way. But I wasn't looking for proof anymore, not really. I was looking for the next thread to pull, and there was one obvious one left, the kind I'd been avoiding without quite admitting it to myself. I needed to go back to that garage after dark. I didn't go that night. I told myself I would, and then I sat in my apartment until almost 2 in the morning, coffee gone cold, working up to it. And then I didn't. There's a difference between being curious about something in daylight and being curious about it standing alone in a parking structure at 1 a.m. And I hit that difference like a wall. I went 2 nights later instead, and I didn't go alone, though it wasn't exactly company in the way that sounds. Casey of everyone was the one who agreed to come, and she agreed for a reason I hadn't expected. She works security at a hotel a few blocks from the Gaslamp, overnight shifts, and she said something over text that made me sit up straighter than anything else had that week. We get weird calls sometimes from guests on the 5th and 6th floor, facing that direction. Noise complaints late at night. Management tells us not to log them as anything specific, just unverified disturbance. Always thought that was a weird way to phrase it. I asked her what she meant by weird calls. She sent back a shrug emoji, and then, a minute later, actual detail. Guests reporting something that sounded like an animal. Low and long, not quite a howl, not quite anything they had words for. Always between 1 and 4 in the morning, always facing the garage side of the building. Management's official line, when pressed, was raccoons or feral cats. The same explanation everyone in this city seemed to have on standby like a company script. We met at the mouth of the alley a little after 11, which felt insane in the way that only becomes clear in hindsight. 2 people walking deliberately toward the place I'd spent a week trying to explain away. Casey had brought a flashlight from her car, the heavy kind, more weapon than tool, and she held it the way someone holds something they've thought about actually using. The alley in the dark looked smaller than it had in daylight, and much bigger than it had at 1 in the morning a week and a half ago, which didn't make sense until I realized the difference was expectation. Last time I hadn't been looking for anything. This time every shadow had a shape I was half assigning to it before my eyes caught up. We found the grate again, patched now with fresh asphalt, a temporary rectangle of black still slightly raised from the surrounding concrete, city crews having come and gone exactly on schedule. The stain was gone, paved over, whatever it had been now sealed underneath a foot of new material. Casey crouched next to it, ran her flashlight along the edge. "They didn't reroute the drain," she said. "Just patched the hole." She looked up at me. "That's weird, right? If something actually broke a pipe down there, you'd think they'd want to know what did it before they just covered it back up." I didn't have an answer for that. We stood there a while longer, and nothing happened, which is its own kind of unsettling when you've spent 2 weeks building up to a moment, and the moment just sits there being ordinary. A car alarm went off somewhere on 4th. A guy walked past the mouth of the alley pushing a shopping cart, glanced at us with mild curiosity, kept moving. The taco shop's exhaust fan clicked on and off in some automated cycle, venting old grease into the cold air. We were about to leave. I'd actually turned to say something to Casey about heading back, when the smell hit. It wasn't strong, not at first. Just a wrongness underneath the usual alley smell of trash and old grease, something wet and mineral. The kind of smell that makes the back of your throat tighten before your brain has even identified what it is. Casey caught it at the same second I did. I saw her flashlight beam swing sideways, fast, toward the far end of the alley where it opened into the service lot. There was nothing there, just the patched grate, the dumpster, the dark mouth of the lot beyond it. But the smell held, thicker for a second, like something had passed through recently rather than something currently present. The difference between walking into a room somebody just left and walking into a room somebody's still in. "Tell me you smell that," Casey said, quiet. "Yeah." Neither of us moved for a few seconds. Then, from somewhere beyond the service lot, not close, not right on top of us, but not far either, maybe the width of a city block away, muffled by the parking structure between us, and whatever it was, came a sound. Low, drawn out. Not quite a howl, exactly like Casey had described secondhand from those hotel calls. Something that didn't have a clean animal category to fit into. It lasted maybe 4 seconds and then it just stopped. The way a sound stops when whatever's making it decides to stop. Not the way a sound fades out on its own. Casey grabbed my arm. We didn't run, exactly. It was more that we both started walking very fast in the same direction at the same time. Back toward the mouth of the alley. Back toward the lit street and the ordinary noise of a Thursday night downtown. And neither of us looked back until we were standing under a streetlight 2 blocks away, breathing harder than the walk should have accounted for. "Okay," Casey said once we'd stopped. "Okay. I don't know what that was. I don't either. But it wasn't raccoons. No." She laughed, short and a little unsteady, the kind of laugh that comes out when your body doesn't know what else to do with the adrenaline. "I have to go tell my manager I'm putting unverified disturbance, still unverified, on my incident report tomorrow, and act completely normal about it." I didn't laugh. I was thinking about the way the sound had cut off clean, deliberately, like something pausing mid-sentence because it had noticed it was being listened to. Nothing happened for 4 days after that, and the nothing was its own kind of exhausting. I'd expected, I don't know what I'd expected, something to escalate. A follow-up sighting, another sound, some new thread to pull. Instead, I went back to my regular life in a way that felt almost insulting, given everything that had just happened. I had 2 client calls that week, one about the organic but aggressive logo, which the guy ended up hating anyway and asking me to make less aggressive, more clean, which is a note I've gotten from clients approximately 400 times in my career and which never stops being funny in a tired way. I did laundry. I went to the grocery store and stood in the cereal aisle longer than necessary, because the fluorescent lighting and the hum of the freezer case felt like the most normal thing in the world, and I wanted to stand inside that normal for a minute. Casey texted twice, both times, just to check I hadn't done anything stupid like go back alone. I hadn't. I'd thought about it. Some nagging, unfinished business itch that kept pulling my attention back toward the Gaslamp every time I drove near downtown. But the sound from that alley had done something the sighting itself hadn't quite managed. It had made the whole thing feel less like a mystery I was piecing together, and more like something that could, under the wrong circumstances, notice me back. Mia and I had lunch on Sunday, a plan that had been on the calendar since before any of this started, and I almost didn't bring any of it up. She asked how I was doing, in the specific tone people use when they've heard secondhand that you've been acting weird, and I gave her the short version. The video frame, Renata, the missing persons case, the smell in the alley, the sound. I left out how scared I'd actually been because saying it out loud in a sunny cafe over eggs, Benedict made the fear feel disproportionate to the setting. She was quiet for a while after I finished, longer than I expected. "I looked at that video again," she said finally. "After you sent me the frame, I zoomed in on my phone like a bunch of times." She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the saucer, not looking at me. "There's a couple other frames right before that one. I didn't send them because I figured it was nothing, but now I'm not so sure." "What do you mean, other frames?" "Like, right before I panned toward Casey for maybe half a second, the shape's not where it is in the frame I sent you. It's closer to the edge of the alley, like it moved between frames." She finally looked up. "I know that sounds insane. It's a night mode video, it's grainy as hell. I could be seeing nothing." I asked her to send them anyway, and she did, right there at the table. 3 still frames pulled from half a second of shaky phone footage. I stared at them under a cafe table's ambient light, and I couldn't honestly tell you if what she was describing was real, or if we'd both just spent 2 weeks training our eyes to find a shape in noise. That's the maddening part of something like this. Once you start looking for a pattern, you can't fully trust yourself to tell the difference between finding one and inventing one. "I keep thinking about Aaron," Mia said, quieter now, Like she didn't want the people at the next table to hear his name. Like actually thinking about him, not just case study material. He was a real person who parked in that garage because it was cheaper. Probably 100 times before whatever happened, and nothing was wrong for 100 nights, and then one night it was. I didn't have anything to say to that, so I didn't say anything, and we sat there for a minute just letting it exist between us, the ordinary cafe noise going on around us like nothing was wrong, because as far as anyone else in that room knew, nothing was. That night I did something I hadn't let myself do yet, which was call Renata directly instead of messaging. She picked up on the fourth ring, sounding surprised, and I told her about the sound in the alley, careful to frame it honestly, that I still didn't have proof of anything, that I wasn't trying to give her false hope about her brother's case, that I just felt like she deserved to know what I'd found even if it didn't lead anywhere solid. She was quiet for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said, "and I need you to just answer honestly, not like, careful. Okay. Do you think whatever you heard is the same thing that got him?" I thought about lying, softening it, giving her the responsible non-answer a reasonable person gives in that situation. I didn't. "I don't know," I said. "But I think it's possible, and I think if it is, it's still there." She didn't say anything for a while after that. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Not upset exactly. More like something had settled into place that had been unsettled for 2 years. "Nobody's ever told me that," she said. "Everyone always tells me it's probably nothing. You're the first person who's told me it's probably something." After we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment for a long time, phone warm in my hand from the call, thinking about the difference between those two sentences. Probably nothing, probably something, and how much weight a person could carry depending on which one they'd been told for 2 years straight. I didn't sleep well that night either. But for the first time since the whole thing started, the thing keeping me awake wasn't just fear. It was the sense that I'd stopped being a bystander in this, whether I'd meant to or not. Casey called me on a Wednesday, her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "I need you to come get me. I'm at work. Something's wrong and I don't want to explain it over the phone." Her hotel was 6 blocks from the garage, close enough that I made it in under 10 minutes, running 2 yellow lights I probably shouldn't have. She was waiting outside the staff entrance, off her uniform vest, arms crossed tight against the cold, and she got in the car without waiting for me to say anything. "There's a guest missing," she said. "Room 514 faces the garage side. Checked in 3 nights ago, alone, business trip according to the reservation. Didn't check out this morning, didn't answer wellness calls. Housekeeping went in an hour ago and the room's empty. Bed not slept in. Wallet, phone, laptop, everything still there. Did they call the police? Manager's handling it like a standard welfare thing right now. Guy probably just partied too hard and crashed somewhere else, that's the assumption." She looked at me. "But I pulled the noise log before I clocked out. Room 514 called the front desk at 1:40 last night. Complained about the same thing everyone always complains about. Something outside, low sound, animal maybe. Front desk logged it, unverified disturbance, same as always, and didn't follow up." I didn't say anything for a second, hands tight on the wheel. "You think he went to go look?" "I think some people hear something weird outside a hotel window at 2 in the morning, and they're curious enough, or drunk enough, or stupid enough, to go find out what it is instead of just complaining to the front desk about it." She was quiet a beat. I would have done the same thing at his age, honestly. We didn't decide anything out loud. We just ended up parked 2 blocks from the garage 20 minutes later, and I understood, without either of us saying it, that we were going to walk the most likely route between the hotel's side entrance and that alley. Because if something had happened, it had probably happened somewhere along that path. And if there was any chance at all that a guy from room 514 was lying somewhere hurt instead of somewhere gone, neither of us could live with not checking. The night was colder than it had been the last time. That particular San Diego cold that doesn't feel like much until it's been sitting in your bones for 20 minutes. We walked the block behind the hotel, flashlights out, checking the gaps between buildings, the recessed doorways, anywhere a person could end up if they'd gone looking for something and found it faster than they expected. We found him in the service lot behind the garage, not far from the patched grate, slumped against the base of the parking structure's rear wall. Alive, barely conscious, breathing shallow, a gash along his forearm that looked less like an accident and more like something had caught him, and he'd pulled free of it. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He wasn't dead, and that fact hit me harder than almost anything else that had happened in the past 2 weeks, because up until that exact second, some part of me had quietly assumed we were too late for anything, except finding out what had happened to Aaron Whitfield 2 years too slow to matter. Casey was already on the phone with 911, giving the address, her voice steady in a way that told me this wasn't the first emergency she'd talked someone through. I knelt next to the guy, told him to stay still, help's coming, and he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength for someone that pale. It was right there, he said, barely above a whisper. It was just standing there, and then it wasn't standing. It was... He didn't finish. His eyes rolled, and I thought for one terrible second he'd gone, but his chest kept moving, shallow and fast. That's when I heard it. Not the low sound from before. Something closer. Something moving. The specific scrape of weight shifting against concrete off to my left, near the mouth of the alley we'd come through 20 minutes earlier. I looked up, and it was there. Not far. Maybe 30 feet, right at the edge of my flashlight's reach. And for the first time, it wasn't a shape at the far end of a street or a blur in a grainy video. It was close enough to see the way its shoulders bunched forward, wider than any humans had a right to be. The patchy dark fur clumped wet against a torso streaked with something I didn't want to name. One shoulder sat lower than the other, like an old injury never healed right, and it shifted its weight from that side before it moved, a small, telling hitch before anything else happened. It didn't come at us right away. It just stood there, head angled toward the three of us, the way it had angled toward me and my friends 2 weeks ago from 60 feet down a dark street, fixed on the movement in front of it. Casey had gone dead silent behind me, phone still pressed to her ear. Dispatcher's voice tinny and distant, asking if anyone was still there. I don't remember deciding to stand up. I just did, slow, hands out, some animal instinct telling me not to run, not yet, because running was the thing that made you pray instead of just an inconvenience. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened at all. Just breathing, mine, the guys on the ground, something low and rattling that might have been the creatures, and the distant wail of a siren finally cutting through the quiet, still blocks away but closing. The shape's head turned toward the sound, and then, without any of the drama I'd have expected 2 weeks ago, it simply stepped back into the dark of the alley and was gone, the way it had been gone before, except this time I understood it wasn't gone. Gone. It was just choosing, again, not to be seen. The guy from room 514 turned out to be named Peter Faulkner, 31, an insurance adjuster from Phoenix in town for a conference. He survived. The gash on his arm needed 22 stitches, and the story he gave the paramedics, and later apparently the police, was that he'd gone outside to smoke and gotten jumped by someone, maybe more than one person, he wasn't sure. Everything happened fast. He didn't mention fur. He didn't mention anything that wasn't easily filed under assault suspect unknown, downtown area, alcohol possibly a factor. I don't know if that was fear talking or just his brain doing the same thing everyone's brain does when the alternative explanation is unlivable. Casey and I gave statements too. We said we'd heard something, gone looking, found him already hurt. We didn't mention what I'd seen standing at the mouth of the alley. I thought about it in the moment, actually opened my mouth to say something to the responding officer, and then watched his face as I described. An animal. Maybe. Large. I couldn't get a good look, and understood immediately from the flatness in his expression exactly how much further that sentence was going to get me. He wrote down unknown assailant, possible animal involvement under investigation, and moved on to the next question, and that was the entire weight of it, filed and forgotten before the ink dried. The week after should have felt like vindication. It didn't. It felt like the opposite, like I'd finally gotten close enough to something real that the reality of it made everything before feel almost quaint. I'd spent 2 weeks chasing a shape, a smell, a rumor on a forum, and now I had an actual person with actual stitches and an actual near-death experience, and instead of that closing anything, it opened up a much worse question. How many other Peter Faulkners were there? Over how many years, each one filed under a category that made the real thing invisible by design? I called Renata again because I felt like I owed her the update even though it wasn't really an update about Aaron at all. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So there's proof now, she said. Sort of. Somebody survived. Sort of, I agreed. Nobody's calling it what it is, though. It's an assault report, a gash, a guy who doesn't remember details. Yeah. She exhaled, something between a laugh and not. That's kind of the story of the last 2 years, honestly. Everybody's got a version of an explanation that's almost true, and none of them add up to the real one. And nobody in charge of anything wants to be the person who says the word out loud. I didn't have a response to that because she was right, and because I was starting to understand something uncomfortable about the shape of this whole thing. That it wasn't hiding because it was clever. It was hiding because the city itself, without anyone consciously deciding to, had built a kind of camouflage around it, out of raccoons and unverified disturbances and cracked pipes and inactive cases. Nobody had to be lying exactly. They just had to keep reaching for the boring explanation every single time, and eventually that habit did all the same work a cover-up would have done, without anyone ever having to admit to one. Casey stopped taking overnight shifts 2 weeks later, transferred to a daytime front desk position at a lower hourly rate, and didn't really talk about why, though we both knew. Mia started parking exclusively in the structure on 4th, 4 blocks further from anything, and made a joke about it once that neither of us laughed at. Jordan, who still didn't know any of the real story, I'd never told him, never found the right moment, never trusted he wouldn't just laugh again, kept suggesting we go back to that bar for his birthday in December, and every time he brought it up, I found a reason to steer the conversation somewhere else. I stopped going downtown at night entirely, which was its own kind of loss, small and stupid sounding out loud. I used to like the Gaslamp. I used to think it was one of the better parts of the city. All that noise and light packed into a few blocks of old brick buildings that used to be something else 100 years ago. Now I couldn't drive past that exit on the 5 without my chest tightening a little, without picturing the alley in daylight and at night both, superimposed on top of each other, the ordinary version and the other one occupying the same 6 feet of pavement. I never got a response to my public records request. 10 to 15 business days came and went, then 30, then I just stopped checking. I looked once, out of habit more than hope, and found that the request had been marked fulfilled with an attached PDF that turned out to be 4 redacted lines about scheduled water main maintenance, dated correctly, containing nothing. The strangest part, the part I keep turning over even now, is that nothing about the actual investigation ever closed. Aaron Whitfield's case is still listed inactive. Peter Faulkner's assault is still listed unsolved. The city never issued any kind of warning, never closed the garage, never did anything except patch a grate and let the whole thing fold itself back into the ordinary texture of downtown, the same way it apparently always had. I think about that a lot. Not the creature itself, not really. That part of it, weirdly, I've mostly made peace with in the specific way you make peace with something you've decided you can't control. What I can't shake is the machinery around it. How easily a city, a hotel, a maintenance department, an entire structure of ordinary, well-meaning, tired people can look directly at something and choose, not maliciously, just habitually, the explanation that lets them stop looking. I used to think I'd been the only one paying attention that night outside the bar. I know now I wasn't even close to the first. It's been 3 months now, and I still park 2 blocks further than I need to whenever I go downtown, which is most weeks, because my life didn't stop requiring me to be near the gas lamp just because I'd rather not be. I finished the logo job, eventually the organic but clean one, and picked up 2 new clients off the back of it, one of them a bar, Not near the Gaslamp, thankfully, out in North Park. That wanted branding built around a howling coyote mascot, which I took, and which felt like either a very small joke the universe was playing on me, or no joke at all. Just the ordinary randomness of freelance work landing wherever it lands. Renata and I still talk. Not often. Maybe once a month. She started a new page a while back. Not the old missing persons one. Something quieter. A private group for what she calls people who've noticed things downtown and don't know who else to tell. 60-some members last I checked. Mostly quiet. Occasionally somebody posts something, a weird smell near a specific block, an unexplained noise logged and dismissed, a friend of a friend who had a bad night out and doesn't like to talk about the details. Nobody's solved anything. Nobody's trying to, exactly. It's less an investigation than a place for the pieces that don't fit anywhere else to sit next to each other and be acknowledged as real, which turns out to matter more than I would have guessed a few months ago. Peter Faulkner moved back to Phoenix after his stitches healed. I don't know if he ever told anyone what actually happened to him that night, whether it's sitting somewhere in the back of his memory the way it sits in mine. Some detail he's decided not to look at too closely because looking at it too closely would mean admitting the boring explanation doesn't hold. I don't blame him for that. I understand it better than I used to. I went back to the alley exactly once more, on a bright, ordinary Tuesday afternoon, mostly to prove to myself I still could. It looked like nothing. A dumpster, flattened cardboard, the grate patched over so smoothly now you'd never know anything had ever cracked it. The taco shop's exhaust fan clicking through its automated cycle, same as always. Daylight really is very good at that, at making a place look like it never held anything at all. Casey and I still hang out, though the friendship's shifted into something quieter, the kind you have with someone who was there for the worst part of a thing you don't fully talk about with anyone else. Mia doesn't bring any of it up anymore. Not because she's forgotten, I don't think, but because some things get easier to carry if you agree, without saying so, to mostly leave them where they happened. I've thought a lot about why it let Peter Faulkner live and, presumably, didn't let Aaron Whitfield. I don't have an answer, and I've stopped expecting one. Maybe it was interrupted both times. Us finding Peter before whatever was going to happen finished happening, some other variable interrupting things 2 years earlier, that never got recorded anywhere, because there was no one left to record it. Maybe there's no pattern at all, no logic a person could map onto it. Just something operating on rules that have nothing to do with what would make sense to me. That's the part I've had the hardest time sitting with, honestly. Not the fear, which faded faster than I expected, but the total absence of a reason. It's not hunting the way something in a story hunts. It's just there, doing whatever it does, on whatever schedule it keeps, and the city just keeps absorbing the edges of it the way it absorbs everything else that doesn't fit the narrative anybody's actually telling. Last week, driving home from a client dinner a little later than I meant to, I got stuck at the light on 5th, the same intersection more or less, where this whole thing started. Traffic was light. A couple people in heavy jackets were crossing against the signal, their breath faint in the cold air, laughing about something. Ordinary, completely ordinary, the exact texture of 100 nights I'd driven through that intersection before any of this happened. I don't know why I looked down that same side street. I hadn't meant to. It's just where my eyes went, the way your eyes go somewhere out of old habit long after the reason for the habit's supposedly passed. The alley was dark, same as it always is at that hour, streetlight not quite reaching the back half of it, and for a second, less than a second really, barely long enough to call it seeing anything at all, I thought there was something standing at the edge of the shadow again. Still, facing the street, watching the flow of it, the way it had watched all those months ago, locked onto the movement in the street for reasons I'll never understand. The light turned green behind me. Somebody honked. I looked back at the road, and when I glanced at the mirror half a block later, the alley had already folded back into the ordinary dark of a city block at night. The kind of dark that could hold anything or nothing, and there was no way, from that distance moving at night, to know which. I didn't go back to check. I've learned that much, at least. that some things you let stay exactly as uncertain as they present themselves, because certainty in either direction might cost you more than the not knowing does. I still drive that route sometimes. I haven't figured out if that's bravery or just the specific, stubborn kind of denial that lets a person keep living somewhere they know isn't entirely safe, because the alternative is admitting the whole city they've built their life in has something folded into its ordinary texture that nobody in charge of anything is ever going to name out loud. Maybe it's both. Maybe those were never really different things to begin with. I don't know if it remembers me the way I remember it. I don't know if that's even the kind of thing it does. Remember, in any sense I'd recognize. But some nights when I catch myself glancing down a dark side street without quite meaning to, I get the distinct, unshakable feeling that somewhere in this city, something is still glancing back.